Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing well. Um, well, I appreciate you joining me and answering 5 questions about burnout. And so, before we get to those questions, why don't you just tell everyone about yourself?
Okay. I'm the pulpit minister for the Athens Church of Christ in Athens, Tennessee. My family has lived here for the past 7 years. Before that, we were in Opp, Alabama, South Alabama for about 11 and a half years working with the church there. We've also lived in North Carolina and Kentucky. Been in ministry now for 27 years. That's
Wow.
hard to believe.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm married to Amy. We've been married for 26 of those years, and
Yeah.
we've got one daughter, Faith, who'll be 16 this fall, which
Wow.
is kind of hard to believe.
Yeah. That time kind of flies by, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It does.
Well, you've been ministry going on 30 years now, and so that's quite a long time. And I'm sure you've kind of had your ups and downs, as we all do. Uh, how do you know if you're suffering from burnout?
Well, burnout, what I've come to find out since I've done a little more reading about it, since all this happened, burnout is very individual. I mean, no two people probably burn out exactly the same way, but I can tell you some of the things that happened in my own journey, in my own life. I found myself going through the motions of ministry, still teaching classes, doing sermons, making visits, doing all the things that we do. And yet it was just that. It was just motions. There
Hmm.
was no joy. And typically there's joy
Yeah.
in some of that. There was none.
Yeah.
It was just cranking stuff out at home. My wife could give you a quite a list of things that were probably different during that time. I was much more reserved, much less involved in my family's life. Very irritable about every little thing that might come up in the family, and it eventually got to the point where I simply couldn't function anymore. There was one Sunday morning where I told a friend of mine, who's Tim Gunnels, you know Tim, who's part of our church family. I said, Tim, I'm going to resign this afternoon. I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah.
Literally got to the point where I cannot do it one more day.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's kind of happened with me. There's just no joy in anything. Everything was just dark and negative, and um, just
Yeah.
no joy whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course we're talking specifically about burnout and ministry. And ministry can be extremely stressful for various reasons, but I guess we need to mention that burnout can happen in other occupations and stuff as well, because there may be, some people watching this that aren't in ministry, but
Sure.
might be suffering burnout, in another area. Well, so as we're thinking about that, what specifically do you believe causes burnout?
Well, in my own case, there's several things that I think came together, but most of it revolved around my thinking. My thinking simply wasn't where it needed to be. And all of us are different in the way we're wired. I kind of have a tendency to sometimes dwell a little bit too much on some negative things and create what if scenarios. I guess we all do, not only in ministry but in things in general. But
Yeah.
I found I did that more. I was doing that more than I had been doing, and just spiraling downward into all the negativity that brought. While that's going on at the same time, um, I found out that when I went through counseling, and I'll touch on that in a little bit, that I lost all distinction between things I could control and things I couldn't control,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking that I can control certain situations when really I maybe could influence them some, but at the end of the day, those situations were out of my control,
Yeah.
and yet I found myself trying to control those things, and that will that will definitely lead to burnout.
Yeah.
During all that time, I'd also gotten to the point where I wasn't doing my daily quiet time. I wasn't
Hmm.
spending the time in the Word with the Lord just to commune with Him,
Yeah.
just to enjoy His presence and enjoy His Word. It became a very formal thing. Okay, I've got to get this lesson together. That's the only time I was in the Word.
Hmm.
Um, that did not help the situation at all. That contributed, I think, greatly to the burnout. And really, another cause was I wasn't doing anything that was really life giving for me. I'll touch on that maybe a little bit more in a minute. But one of the first questions my counselor asked me when I started going to counseling was, Mark, what are you doing that's life giving for you?
Mm.
And the fact I couldn't answer that spoke volumes.
Yeah.
There was nothing that I was doing that was really life giving for me. But the end of the day, the thing that caused it mostly was my thinking and dwelling on things and just letting that go in a direction for an extended period that wasn't healthy.
Yeah. And so what you did is you kind of took an extended break. One of the things that you did, you know.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times that's called a sabbatical. Sometimes people might call it something else. But what is a sabbatical and why is it helpful? You know, how did it help you in your situation?
Well, sabbatical is one of those words that I was familiar with. I kind of knew what it was, and yet I didn't know a whole lot about how it might work. Thankfully, again, I mentioned Tim Gunnels earlier. Tim suggested to our elders that maybe that's what I needed. Rather than resigning and just getting out of ministry, take that time to recenter. And that's what I did. A sabbatical really is just an extended period. For me, it was 2 months, a month completely away from the work, and another month to kind of slowly get back into it. But it's an extended period where you can get away from the responsibilities. You know, if you're having to churn out lessons and sermons and visits and all the things that ministry involves, and you're having to still do all that while at the same time figuring out what the problem is and getting away from it, you can't do it. And so it allowed me to back up, to step away from all that. In my case, it allowed me to go to counseling. I found a fantastic counselor who
Mm-hmm.
was very familiar with ministry burnout. He walked me through several things that I needed to think about,
Yeah.
and that was tremendously helpful. Just having the time to be able to do that without all the responsibilities being on you. It gave me a time to recenter on some things, to get out, to just enjoy taking a walk. You know, a little thing like that I had kind of just let slip with everything that had been going on. So that's what a sabbatical was. It was very, very helpful to me,
Yeah.
mainly because it allowed me to back up
Yeah.
and get out from under the responsibilities that are on me so that I can figure out how we can move in a healthier direction.
Yeah. And I don't know if people realize this or not, but the root of that word is Sabbath, you know,
Yeah.
and so it comes from a biblical idea, and you know, you kind of find, you know, we tend to think of the Sabbath day, but there's all kinds of Sabbaths in the Old Testament, you know, that apply to different areas of
Sure.
life, and you know, it's I guess some might say, well, it's a vacation, but it's not a vacation. It's a
No.
break with a purpose. You know,
Right.
you're resting in order to, you know, help your, I guess, spirituality, your you know, you talked about thinking, your mental capability, and hopefully to come back refreshed to bless the congregation, you know, and those around you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And to my elders' credit, I'm not sure they were really familiar with the concept,
Yeah.
but they understood something had to be done. Either we just this ends right here and we let Mark walk away, or we do something to try to help him find the spiritual health he needs. And so even though they really weren't familiar with it, they said, you know, we're going to do that, and I love
Yeah.
them for that.
Well, sounds like a great group of elders, you know, who are
Yes, sir. No doubt.
concerned about the individuals as, you know, elders should be. Well, so, you know, kind of piggybacking on that, what can churches do to help prevent burnout among ministers?
I think really one of the keys to that, Scott, is just for church leaders, shepherds, elders to know their ministers, not just to have a working relationship with them where you're shepherd and your minister, but to really know them
Yeah.
on a personal level. Because when you know somebody on a personal level, you can sort of see the signs that you might not be able to see otherwise. But when you have that kind of relationship, you can see it, and then you can approach them and say, hey, what's going on? And
Yeah.
then you can have that conversation. That's probably the biggest thing is church leaders know your ministers, get to know them, have that kind of deep relationship with them. So you can see those signs, and when you see them, uh, boy, be proactive, like
Mm-hmm.
my shepherds were. Be willing to say, hey, maybe a sabbatical would be a good idea. We know a good counselor here. Can we help you set that up? What can we do to help you find health again?
Yeah.
I think that's a key. Just being open to that and being observant and having that relationship
Yeah.
is so key.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's great. Um, and so, what are some maybe healthy practices a minister could incorporate into their everyday lives to kind of just good for spiritual health, mental health? You know, might help prevent burnout, or maybe afterwards, after a period of burnout, something that people can do to just kind of um, center themselves and get back to where they need to be.
Sure. Self-care is important, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that my counselor and I discussed for several weeks. Taking care of yourself. We are so wired in ministry to try to take care of everybody else, and yet often we neglect our own health when it comes to mind and body and spirit. All three of those elements are so important. Mind, we need to, whatever is mentally stimulating to you, we need to be doing that. Not just for our work, not just for things, projects we have going on, but something to really engage our minds and body. We don't like to talk about it, but that's an important key, I think, in this.
Yeah.
I had a pattern of doing some exercising and trying to be healthy in that regard. But when all of this really started caving in on me, guess what? The first thing I let go of was, because I didn't wasn't motivated to do it anymore. Well, I'm not gonna exercise. Worst thing I could have done. That's important. Mind,
Yeah.
body, and of course spirit. Find that time, and we ministers know this. We talk about this. We've known this all our lives. Don't just have your time in the Word be time to prepare a sermon or prepare a class, but really carve out that time in your schedule to have that devotional time with God. A book that really helped me, well, it kind of stepped on me a little bit, but helped me in the end was Dangerous Calling by Paul David Tripp.
Okay.
It's a book I'd heard of, but I'd never really read. A friend of mine suggested it. It wore me out.
Yeah.
Or thinking that, well, I don't need that devotional time. I've been doing this for 26 years as a minister. I know what I'm doing. I got this covered.
Yeah.
No, we need it. We absolutely need it. So those three things are big: mind, body, and spirit. Taking care of yourself. Those are vital. I think another thing that we constantly need to be doing as ministers is thinking about what can we control and what can we not control.
Mm.
It's so easy to lose the distinction between those things. There are so many things we can influence. We need to try to influence it, but at the end of the day, we can't control that,
Yeah.
and we've got to figure out. I had to figure out how can I better invest my resources and invest the energy that I have instead of trying to control these things. What can I do that would be more healthy than that? And so, circles of influence are, I think, were big. One thing that helped me that I would think all of us as ministers need to remember one thing I did was I began to look at other people and see all the things they need to be doing, and if they were just doing this, then the church would be better, and things would be better. And yet, while I was being very critical of what other people were doing, I forgot I need God's grace too, because I'm not what I need to be.
Yeah.
I think we as ministers need to remind ourselves that it's easy to look at external things and say, well, if this were different, and if they were different, and if that were different, well, true maybe, but they need grace, and I need grace too. And that was very helpful to me, just to remind myself of that. I'm not where I need to be either.
Yeah.
I need God. I need His grace, and I need it daily.
Yeah. 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 That's so good. I think sometimes we as ministers, we spend every day thinking about the church, and what's going on in the church and the activities of the church. And so we become so focused on that, which, is a good thing. We should be. But we have to, I think, sometimes realize that other people aren't as focused on it as we are.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're right about the things, there's just some things that we can't control. And we can maybe offer good advice and do a thing or two here or there, but sometimes we have to free ourselves of that burden.
Yes.
So, man, well, hey, I appreciate you answering those 5 questions. I think that's going to be helpful because all of us ministers kind of go through these peaks and valleys, and there are times when it can be very stressful, and we do kind of suffer from burnout. So I think what you're sharing here is going to help a lot of people, and I appreciate you giving your time.
Oh, no problem, Scott. If I could say one more thing
Yeah, go ahead.
to us as ministers, we all, as you mentioned, go through the peaks and valleys. But if you find yourself going through that extended valley,
Mm,
and there's just no light at the end of the tunnel for an extended period of time, don't be afraid to say something to somebody. If maybe nobody else has noticed that, we need to be proactive in saying to someone we trust, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. I need help."
yeah.
I think we've gotten to the point where there's no shame in that, and we don't need to be ashamed to do that. We got to be able to say, "Hey, I need help. Please help me find it."
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because I think maybe sometimes as ministers we want to try to kind of put up seem like
Yeah.
we're strong, and we're not weak in any way, and we're the leaders. But there are times when we ourselves need help, and I think that when you go through that, and maybe you could speak to this with your congregation, your eldership, and you come out on the other side, I would assume that you come out in a better place, and that your relationships are stronger, and that you're in a better place as a congregation, as a minister, as an eldership.
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many people I have had approach me uh, during the 2 months and since certainly the 2 months who have said to me, "Man, we appreciate you being authentic
Mm-hmm.
and being real with us." We, sometimes we think we've got to be perfect and we can't admit any weaknesses and we can't admit any flaws. We can't show that crack in the armor, and that's far from the case. And yeah, I think it's helped me. It certainly helped me in my relationships with the people here.
Yeah,
They know, hey, Mark doesn't have it all together. He's trying. He's struggling. He needs help just like I do, and
yeah,
he's real. And that has really, I think, helped me as I've tried to communicate and minister to people.
yeah, yeah. One of the interesting things is you look at Scripture and you don't find any perfect leaders besides Jesus.
Yeah, yeah,
All of them have multiple flaws. And so do we.
yep,
So, well, hey, Mark,
absolutely.
appreciate you taking the time and doing this and sharing your thoughts with us.
No problem, Scott. Appreciate you asking me to come on today. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, and look for another video next week.